Sugar and Spikes is a science-backed and semi-sarcastic mental health podcast for a new type of business leader. Mental health concerns are occasionally addressed, but this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any condition, mental, physical, metaphysical, or otherwise. That's a job for your doctor or therapist, not a podcast. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's get on with the show.
To another episode of the Sugar and Spikes podcast. I'm Dez. I'm a serial content creator and your co-hostess with the mostest, and my iPad thinks I said Siri. Go away. Okay.
Well, I'm Tammy. I am a psychologist, and I don't have any follow-up to that to kind of like make it lead into anything, but it feels weird to just be like, and stop.
But it works. And you saw your way through the weirdness. You emotionally acknowledged the situation. You were aware of it. You read the room. Which, hey, ties right into what we're talking about this week.
I wasn't even trying. Hey, go me.
Yeah. That was very emotionally intelligent of you.
Thank you. Mm-hmm, yes, some would say as a psychologist that I have high emotional intelligence.
Emotional intelligence it's fun because it's kind of one of those things that I think for those of us that went through psych grad school, the two of us here and anyone listening, or even I think business school because it's kind of like a trendy business thing.
Remember that the horrible leadership class? That was like my one takeaway.
It's this thing that is talked about in various programs. That's kind of like entry level, and you can kind of gloss over it. But really, there's a lot to unpack and there's a lot to work with, and is a pretty like malleable and a skill you can develop.
Yeah, it's true.
That has been shown to support the idea that that helps success and things like that. But it's also something that isn't often talked about in like larger circles. Like, I think folks that went to B school and, like I said, grad school, we hear about it. But if you're just, like, making your way through life, doing the job thing or the starting a business thing, emotional intelligence, like, you don't sit down and you're like, I need to work on my emotional intelligence.
Yeah, probably not.
Yeah.
Like, we could talk about it, though, for, like, an hour and still not even have, like, scratched the surface. So.
I mean, there are programs around it. There are whole certificate programs. A lot of psychologists and behavioral scientists dedicate their life to it.
Right.
It is a deep, deep topic.
It is.
But for those of you listening who are not behavioral scientists or psychologists or ready to commit your life to studying emotional intelligence, let's open it with what is emotional intelligence?
Oh, okay. I was going to say let's open it with what is not, but we'll go your way first.
What is it not?
Well, I think the first thing is people probably think, oh, it's innate. It's like a personality trait. I either have it or I don't. And all I want to say before we jump into what it is that is not true.
Yeah. Would you believe that somebody once told me that I had no emotional intelligence?
That's so ridiculous. It still makes me laugh. I'm like, so I can't. I don't even have words. Like, what are you even fucking telling me right now?
Yeah.
So not true.
So, fun fact, if someone tells you that you don't have emotional intelligence, you can probably safely bet that they're the ones without it.
Right? I was going to say, then you know that they don't have emotional intelligence because that is not how you would say that.
I was going to say, it's something no one would say.
I would never say that to somebody.
No.
I feel like it's so horrible.
Yeah.
Judgy.
Yeah.
And like, I'm judgy in other ways, but that's still shitty.
Yeah. No, that's... Yeah.
So, I mean, at its very core...
Wait, were you going to continue dispelling myths?
No.
Okay.
I just wanted to do that one.
Okay. Cool.
I'm being selective.
Okay.
I'm trying to, like, edit.
Why?
I don't know.
Have you listened to the podcast?
I'm trying to be someone I'm not then, I guess. Okay. But that's all I'm going to say. It's not a personality.
It is not a personality.
It's not.
Well, I think that is good because so if I were not myself and if someone had told me, hey, you don't have emotional intelligence, that could have kind of screwed me over.
I know.
You know, that could have really hurt.
It really hurt anyway, but in
a different way. But like it could have thrown me off course. It could have almost done a certain type of damage if I had this idea that it was a trait and it's a trait that, you know, successful people have and someone's telling me I don't have it, then I'm screwed and I'm never going to be successful. And it could have like really sent me down this other type of spiral.
Well, don't you know that all you have to do is wake up early?
Right. That's the only thing for success in life.
So even though you didn't have emotional intelligence, you could override that with getting up early. I'm sorry. That's just so ridiculous to me every time I think about it. Anyway, okay. So it's not personality, right? And I think that that's important because you're right. Like, and it made me think of a discussion we were just having where I'm like, well, it's like a tape that you play in your head. Then I don't have any emotional intelligence. I'm not an emotionally intelligent person. Like it just becomes, it can become part of your own narrative for yourself. And it, not even that you would even know that it did, but it just did, you know? So it's all in what we tell ourselves. But anyway, emotional intelligence, it helps us to be aware of our emotions, to be able to identify them, and to kind of use them to our advantage. And like the way that I think about it is, so in regards to yourself, it's like knowing your process, right? Like the more you know your process, the more you can use it to your advantage, right? And so like, I don't like change. I always want to go running back in the other direction, but I know that that's my process. So I know if I wait it out X amount of time, that feeling, that emotion, that whatever's going on will go away. And so there's a certain amount of power in that, right? Because you have this more objective view of how to manage yourself and your emotions and kind of harness the power, right? To use them for good.
Yeah.
The other thing is that having emotional intelligence in regards to others, it increases our empathy. It's kind of like not putting yourself in the other person's shoes, because I don't really think that's empathy. But I think it's like understanding what they're feeling in that moment, and really being side by side with them, if that makes sense. Because like, I think a lot of people have this idea like, oh, I haven't been through that. I don't know what it's like. And I'm like, that's true, but you've been sad before. You know how it feels to be sad.
Yeah.
They're sad. So you can be sad and walk alongside them. You don't necessarily have to have experienced things in the exact way. Because, you know, a lot of people say that like with therapists, like, you don't know where I'm coming from. This has never happened to you, blah, 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 right? Especially if like you're a much like younger therapist and the client's a lot older. But I think that that's a misconception. It's like, how can you have empathy for me if you haven't walked in my shoes? But how can you have empathy? Well, I've been sad. You've been sad. We've all been sad. We can share in that together.
It's the like, I don't have to break a bone to know that a broken bone hurts.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I think also, as you're talking about it, and maybe it's kind of the way that I'm listening in my perspective that I'm bringing in, when you talk about like being alongside a person and kind of walking with them, it sounds almost like a longer term situation or relationship, which yes, emotional intelligence is foundational to relationship building, and business is nothing but relationship.
Yep.
Not nothing, but you were talking like 90% relationship.
That's like foundational.
Yeah, it is key. But it can be in the moment and very much a quick like glimpse to help navigate that relationship building.
Yeah.
So almost like a read the room type situation or read the other person. Like if I were to walk up to you and you were at your desk, like just so focused on something, it's, well, is now a good time to interrupt her if you've been trying to like work on something forever. Like if I knew you'd been trying to do this project for a long time and just kept getting distracted and everything, if I saw you like in the zone checking in like, is this the best time?
Yeah.
Probably not. I'm going to send a Slack message.
And also, like, if you're a manager and you have to, you know, do the not fun parts of managing, you can help get the person through that situation with high levels of emotional intelligence because it will color in a positive way how you say the things you have to say and how the things you say help to kind of, what am I trying to say? There's a word I'm trying to use and I can't think of what it is. Oh, to like modulate their emotions. Because like we can't do that for them, but certainly like you can say something shitty in a like this really hurtful way, or you can say something in a more objective way that isn't like, it can be truth but not harsh.
Right.
So that I would say would be good emotional intelligence. Like, you know, this is going to hurt. This isn't going to feel good to have this conversation. So how can you give it in a way that like honors both sides of that?
An example of this would be not Sheldon from Big Bang Theory.
Right.
Like he has next to no emotional intelligence in terms of interacting with somebody. In fact, I think that's like a storyline where they try to teach him like, here's how to like read somebody.
I don't know. That's kind of like his whole like thing for as long as it was on. I mean, like that's what's kind of funny about it. Like he doesn't get it.
Yeah.
But it can be really obvious like that, but it can be subtle too. Like think back to managers you've had or listeners, managers you had or coworkers, people in your life where you're like, I just don't feel like we're connected. Like you keep missing each other somehow.
Yeah.
Well, that might be due to the fact that like you can't read each other, right? And that's emotional intelligence. And so you can definitely teach it.
Well, and I think also acknowledging it, and especially for work, and things like that, where there's kind of like a higher goal where it's like relationship to a goal.
Yeah.
Can be key because, I mean, using an example with us in the podcast recently is, I think I explicitly said, I know today's not a great day to record because you're in a place and here's why I'm like making us do it.
Right.
You
so
know?
you presented it in another way than usually it's just like what time you're coming over to record, right? You knew like that isn't going to work this time.
Yeah. Well, and like connecting it to the bigger goal beyond simply having it be a recording session. It's, look, I get it, but this is the end that we're working towards.
But the I get it part is the important part of that, right? So like, you get it. I'm kind of like maxed out at the moment. And you even said like, and I recognize that maybe asking to do as much in a day as what I'm asking is unreasonable. And so let's go for it. But if it doesn't end up that way, that's fine.
Yeah.
So when you think about that versus like, we need to record 3 episodes today.
And just leaving it there.
Yeah. Like both those things are objectively true, but which strategy is going to work better, right? So that's like a real life example of kind of what I was saying in terms of like the concept.
Yeah.
So managers with good emotional intelligence, they get more out of their workers. They get their people beneath them that are more invested in what they're doing. Because like when you can buy into what your manager is doing and like you feel like you're part of something greater, then you're willing to do more.
Right.
And like it's like a saying, but it's true. Like people leave bad bosses, not bad jobs.
Oh yeah.
Like, so think about that. So you have somebody who talks to you every day, like, we have to do this. We have to do that. You need to do
When
this.
is this? Where is this?
Right. Why are you doing that? Like, does that seem like they really care or they really get you or like anything?
Or on the flip side, people that are too invested in emotions, like I can't think of any specific example that I've experienced, but I know that there are supervisors like that that are too like I don't want to
Too
say
feely?
friendly,
Oh.
too almost, but too like, are you sure? Is this okay? Like to people that like aren't confident in their space as a
It's like people
manager.
trying to tiptoe around people's
Exactly.
emotions.
Yeah, like that.
Like, I don't want to make you mad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like, I just want to make sure this is okay. Are you sure? Are you sure? Like at that point, like you're dealing with an adult, and if you've given them space to say, well, I don't have time, and they haven't, then that's on them. Move on, get the job done.
Yeah.
You know, because again, we're not talking about, friendly emotional intelligence. Like this is emotional intelligence in the workplace.
Right.
Things like that.
Like it doesn't mean you don't have to deliver direct messages. It doesn't mean that you don't have to tell people things they might not like, but it's like doing it in this way that like honors and respects the other person. Right. And so, yeah, there was something I was going to say, but
I'm sorry.
No, it's totally fine. I just was like, I thought about it and then it left. It'll come back. Oh, I remember what I was going to say. So like some people, I think like why I wanted to say what I think empathy is because sometimes I think empathy and sympathy get commingled and they're not the same thing.
No, they're not.
Like sympathy is like the feeling what the other person's feeling, like being in their shoes and like it's almost like taking on somebody else's stuff in a way to try and understand them. Whereas empathy isn't really like that. You're not trying to step in and take control and carry that burden.
Right.
You're trying to say, I recognize that you're carrying this right now and it's really difficult and I'm here to help. Very different.
Yeah.
Right? So, and a lot of us do that. Like people who have a lot of compassion, that can cross over really easily to like taking things on that aren't yours. Because you naturally care. So that's where boundaries come in, right? I guess empathy is like sympathy with boundaries.
Right.
Yeah. I think like an easy, quick way to put it. So sometimes I think as therapists particularly, you can check in with yourself every once in a while if you're feeling a particular way. Like, am I carrying something that isn't mine to carry? But as a manager, you can too. Like the person who's like, oh, are you okay? Oh, I didn't mean to. Like, it's like caretaking the other person and like taking on something that's not yours. Like they work for you. They will do what you want. Like stop tiptoeing around them and like caretaking when you don't need to. So yeah.
Did you have more of like what emotional intelligence looks like?
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I got off on a tangent.
No. I want to make sure we cover like kind of what it is and cuz we kind of talked about like why it's important, but yeah.
So okay. It is a way of relationship building in the moment. Like short-term relationship building.
Yeah.
And it can kind of like go into the longer thing. But even if you can have this in an interaction where you'll never see the person again, like angry customer in Starbucks, like, not pleasant, but you can kind of get it.
You can get the vibe and to be like extra nice in that moment. Right. Like, yes, sir.
Or like, hey, you seem like you really need it. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Like, and you don't have to necessarily do it that way, but it's just a way of dealing with people where you're recognizing what they need or how to help in a particular way.
Exactly. And really helping and reading the situation and using emotional intelligence while either working with your coworkers or with customers or clients, it really sets you up as a leader.
Yeah.
Because there's going to be this natural level of trust that happens. And when Well, there's going to be a natural level of like people feeling heard. And when people feel heard, they trust you.
Right.
And when you have someone's trust, you can get them to do bigger things, which goes back to what you're saying. Like it brings more out of your employees, but I think also like customers, clients, it builds good faith, really.
I mean, and I think sometimes if you're wondering if somebody has emotional intelligence, look at how they treat like service staff. Like, look how they order from a server in a restaurant. And that would kind of tell you.
Yeah.
You know, like, are they being demanding and shitty? Or like, are they recognizing that it's busy and there's like one server, they're obviously short staffed and like being able to be like, oh yeah, I'm pretty annoyed, but that person is like running around and doing the best they can. So like you get it, you know?
Yeah.
And you can kind of like change I don't know why my words are leaving me so much today. You can change how you respond, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, and maybe emotional intelligence is hard. Like I know when the idea first gets brought up and stuff, it can seem a little overwhelming. I think especially for like, I'm going to make some sweeping judgments, like analysts, folks that work with a lot of numbers, statisticians, even, you know, engineers. I would say a good amount of professors, coders. Anyways, a lot of folks, like, it can be hard, even designers, because there's so... Anyways, there's so many fields where emotional intelligence isn't taught. And I think that that's one thing that we, like Tammy and I, have to remind ourselves because it's the field that we've spent so much time in.
Well, I mean... I basically spent the last 7 years like cultivating my emotional intelligence.
Well, and marketing is reading the room of like your customer base.
Right.
So it's
like that's what we do.
Yeah.
That's what we do for a living. We have high emotional intelligence.
Exactly. But if you don't, because like again, it helps with leadership, it can help with like giving or receiving performance reviews and managing that in a professional way. And again, going back to that, becoming the go-to leader. If those are things that like you're wanting to work towards and you're like, well, I don't know kind of where I fall in emotional intelligence, but I want to work on it. There are a couple ways to kind of go about that because the research says, I mean, some of the research is a little split, but in general, the broad research shows that emotional intelligence is really influential in your level of success. I feel like I added all the caveats I needed to.
All the academic caveats. Yeah.
It's really good
like
to
we think, we're not sure, it's highly likely.
Yeah. In general, it's really good to have. So if it's something where you're like, well, I'm not sure and I want to kind of like develop it, there are some things.
Okay.
So the first thing would be reflecting, taking a minute and kind of holding a mirror to how you respond to situations and starting to become familiar with the emotions that pop up in even just minor situations. And I think even you and I do this to a certain degree where we get emails and it's like, oh, she was not happy or something. Like, am I reading this right? Is this the tone? And, you know, sometimes it takes like asking someone else, like, is this it? Like, you can reflect. But especially if it's kind of new or if this person is new, then getting like an outsider's perspective, like maybe they're not like, okay, read it just very dryly, you know, things like that.
Or say it out loud.
So that's like an example for email. And we've all had like those communication snafus where it's like that text was weird, that message was weird, the email, all that stuff, because so many forms of communication are just like essentially text messages now.
Sorry, you're saying text message. I'm like, it loses all the nonverbal components.
Exactly, yeah. Like you lose so much, even versus like a phone call, which, I mean, tried and true millennial, I'm not a fan of phone calls.
I'm not either.
Like even those give you more information than an email. So when you're just working with that, your brain fills in a lot of gaps, which may not always be accurate.
Right.
So then you're responding to emotions that may not be present.
Yeah, that's true. It's kind of like understanding not to take things personally all the time.
Yeah. And I mean, it goes back to something that you say so often, which is people are doing the best they can. So having these situations where like there was that email that felt weird, someone cut you off in a meeting, things like that. Notice your immediate response and check in around well, is that the case?
Yeah, so we were talking about that. I'm not going to say the words, but we talked about how, like, if somebody didn't give a vegan option, how I could take that really personally and be like, you just don't care that I'm a vegan. You don't have any respect for me, blah, blah, blah. But really what emotional intelligence would be like thinking about that situation and being like, well, that's my immediate reaction. Do I think that that's accurate? And also, if you're not really sure, it helps you find a way to approach the other person and ask about it.
Yeah.
So, like, I think one thing I've learned, not one thing, I've learned a million things, but one thing that constantly sticks with me is like, if I get a feeling that something's going on, but I don't know what it is, I won't try and label it. I'll be like, it seems like something weird is going on here.
Well, and that brings us to like another kind of step. If we're going to make these any sort of steps, it would be like that awareness, like checking in. And if you need to, like ask someone else. But then once it's kind of identified, take a beat, like take that pause and like almost let it be, you know, before there's any sort of response, before there's any sort of action taken.
Yeah.
Because especially if something happens that triggers an emotional response quickly,
a strong one,
a strong, quick emotional response, you're not working with your full IQ, like your brain.
I think it's like 30 points when we're angry.
Yeah.
Like, who has 30 points to lose?
Exactly.
Like, nobody.
Yeah. But even in like these quick moments, jumping to responses isn't always the best.
Right.
It's rarely the best.
Well, like I have said for as long as, I don't know, a long freaking time, like I really admire people who are able to like give quick stuff and like think on their feet. Whereas I know that my process is more like, let me get back to you. Let me think about that. Like, because my first attempt isn't anywhere near my final one.
Yeah.
And so for me, I have to take that space. So anyway, totally off topic, but I always really appreciate those people.
Yeah. No, like taking a pause is good, and it doesn't have to be a long pause. I think that's the other thing. Like it could be a breath to kind of just process and then moving forward, or it could be longer to kind of investigate the situation. It really depends on what situation you're navigating.
Yeah. And the other thing is not labeling what you think it is. Like, I think that person's mad at me. Like, you felt something weird and you're like, that person's mad at me. First of all, are you taking something personally that isn't personal? So you can check in around that. But you're still pretty convinced that like something's going on, but you don't know what it is. So I think a lot of times people are like, are you mad at me? And really, that might not be the right question, because maybe they aren't mad. Maybe it's something else.
Yeah.
And so really asking, hey, it seems like something's going on between us. I don't know if you sensed that too, but I'm just curious how you've been reading that.
Yeah.
And that might open up a very fruitful discussion. Whereas, are you mad at me? May or may not it could make the person feel defensive. It can be like, no, they weren't mad. They were something else. So then they won't tell you because they're responding truthfully to your question. But you're not quite asking the right question.
Well, that goes back to another level of curiosity around what could the reason be? Like, if there was a tone in the email, like, what is causing this person to be aggravated with me? Is there a reason? If so, then maybe it's worth acknowledging. Maybe it's that person's having a bad day, like giving space for it to be not about you.
Yeah.
Like, we're very self-centered.
Yeah. Everybody.
Yeah, and everyone assumes that other things are about them when we're also so self-centered that we're wrapped up in what's going on with us. So, and like this has happened between me and Tammy so many times where one person's like, are you mad at me? And it's like, no, I'm just mad, or I'm just aggravated. Like, I just have things.
Yeah.
You know, and it's not about the other person. So really kind of, you know, again, taking that moment and going through this kind of even like internal curiosity of, could there be other things? Is it worth having a conversation about, or is it worth like moving on? And if it becomes a problem, then, you know,
yeah, you could choose to just file it away.
Exactly.
And
like,
be like, here's a thing. And like, I'm just going to keep going. And, oh, here's this other thing. And
yeah.
Until you kind of see a pattern.
Or you could like diffuse the situation if you know it's working towards a larger kind of process, a larger relationship, then just letting it go. It's a completely viable option.
Oh, totally. And I think like, are you mad at me? Those kinds of questions. I think back to like, so a lot of learning how to do therapy is learning how to ask an effective question or make an effective observation. And so like one thing that like first year therapists almost always do is they say, well, like, were you happy, or were you mad, or like they start coming up with options for the client when really you just have to say, how did you feel?
There's a reason that's a cliche question.
Right? I know. So like everyone does it. And you have to learn how to move beyond that. But we do that in our personal lives too. Like, I didn't know if you were like mad at me or if I had done something wrong. Like, you're not asking the right question. So you want to keep it like as broad as possible to give the person the opportunity to answer.
Exactly.
So there's my tip.
Yeah. And I think really it's an art. It is not a science. Emotional intelligence, it sounds sciencey, but it's actually one of the things that's a bit of an art form. And
it's both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're going to get messy. You're going to try. There's going to be mistakes that are made. It's not going to go well sometimes. I think the important thing is to continue practicing and being aware of it and really kind of refining your skills to the point where it does become almost second nature.
Yeah.
Like, I think,
it takes a lot of work to get there, but you can get there.
Oh, I mean, to this day, I still have to like cognitively check in with myself to make sure that I'm not monopolizing conversations at networking events, because only child self-centered, everything's about me. So like so much training so many years later, I still have to remind myself, and you have to text me sometimes. I'm pointing at Tammy to be like, remember to ask questions.
Yeah.
You know, so there's no like final like finish line or anything like that. We're all gonna have our strengths.
Yeah.
I'm really good at the looking and reading the room. But in terms of, because emotional intelligence is also about like listening and managing engagement, especially like when we were talking networking events and stuff. It's the interaction, not just the response.
Well, another thing that I was thinking about is like it's 95% of what you say has nothing to do with the words you're using. And one of the things we always work to kind of hone our skills when we're psychologists or therapists is like, what is the person saying? Like, here's the words, but what are they saying? Like, my kid's having a meltdown when I asked about homework. Okay, so I can either kind of be upset about that, or I can hear what he's saying, which is, I can't do this on my own. It's super overwhelming, and I just can't face doing it. That's what he's saying with the behavior and the things that he's doing. And that's an art. That is. It just is. And it's something you have to work on constantly.
Exactly.
But
Practice.
But I think it's helpful, right? Because like there is that 95%. So it's really about finding that. I don't know. I think it's funny. When people are therapists, like in a room all together, I feel like you just sit there and kind of like ask open-ended questions and don't ever say anything. Like when we first started doing interviews, like I listened to some of them and I was like, I would just do like a reframe and stop talking. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know that that's really working here.
Which is another part of emotional intelligence, like looking back on your own interaction style and things like that. Like, so much of it is rooted in that self-awareness and checking in and practicing, because your interview style now is different than it was 2 years ago.
Right. As you develop that skill, right? And you can talk about like different things for different roles, right? And so that kind of goes back to knowing when to pull out that skill, knowing when to wear that outfit to a networking event versus wearing this to go to work in my day job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm thinking like I almost see
It just like killed the mood.
Well, no, I'm thinking like emotional intelligence is almost like a shade or a color. Like you can pull out the jacket, but a purple jacket is going to do something different than a red jacket, you know, and how if you interact from a place of emotional intelligence, your experience is going to be different than interacting.
Right. Like, what does it say that I'm wearing? So, okay, going back to like when I was interviewing for internships, and are you the one that wears the black suit? Are you the one that wears maybe black pants, but a different color jacket, but maybe in subdued tones? Are you the one who's wearing like a bright red jacket? All those things say something different. So what are you saying? And like, how are you reading the room of where you're going?
Yeah.
To say those things in an accurate way. So I think it is a lot about emotional intelligence. Like you wearing a red jacket, it's like power, right? Versus the interviewer in the black jacket, which says, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. I'm here in like appropriate attire, quote unquote. And you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That says something different. So,
yeah. It all comes back to being present in the moment and being aware of the many moving pieces of a situation and stepping up and taking kind of like your spot in all of it. Sometimes it's going to go well and people are going to applaud you, and sometimes it's not going to be great.
And I think, remember that I think what we're describing seems simple, but it can feel really overwhelming, excuse me, in the beginning, and feeling like, and you also have this feeling like I have to know everything. And what you kind of really figure out is that you don't have to know everything. You just have to know how to ask questions to find out.
Yeah. You don't have to know everything. It starts with knowing your response.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Cause like, sorry, I lost my train of thought. I looked out the window and I lost my train of thought. So I don't mean to keep bringing it back to therapists, but I think emotional intelligence really speaks to the heart of like what psychology is as a profession in that way. Early therapists think they have to know everything. Like, what if the client asks me this and I don't know? First year me would have been like, I don't even know what I would do. I have to know everything. What if I don't know everything? I'm super anxious. And me now is like, I would just say, I don't know. Or I don't know. Let's find out together. Or, I mean, like there's lots of different ways to navigate that.
Yeah.
So like this idea of emotional intelligence, I don't want it to be like, if you have high emotional intelligence, you know everything that's going on and you can always accurately read the room and you always have the right response and you always know everything.
No, emotional intelligence is knowing, like I think about it in terms of like more of an office setting. It's knowing when it's okay to say, let me think about it, versus knowing when you better have some sort of an answer.
Yep.
In that one-on-one, or else that's going to look really, it is knowing how to read the room and then processing what is expected of you in that moment and understanding how people are interacting with you as well.
Right. So practice, practice, practice.
Exactly. Have fun with that, guys.
Talk to you later. Bye, friends.